Hi guys, welcome back. This is the Airarms X200 Vanguard, the mythical beast, the subject of many conspiracy theories, but it's finally here, and I've had this one a good few months. The Vanguard is one of a number of different models. There's quite a lot of different configurations for this rifle. You can have bottles and cylinders and things like that, but I am in a tricky situation with this. I can't review it. I designed half of this. I developed half of this. I ran various development projects for Airarms a number of years ago about the feasibility of doing it in the polymer, various stuff like that. I've taken a lot of what we do in the aftermarket, the custom weld, and we've pulled it into a factory rifle. Now, I don't work for Airarms. I'm basically unemployable at this point. I'm way too feral for any of that. Doing some work for a firm a number of years ago is very different to being employed by someone. But please, under no circumstances, consider this a review. I'm very attached to this. The amount of sleepless nights that went into this at the design and development stages was just unreal. And for any of you that have watched the channel for any period of time, you know what I'm like. I'm a bit of a nerdy obsessive. Well, it turns out there's quite a few of those down at Airarms as well. I've met some really nerdy people from all around the world. It's been a fascinating project to be involved with, but please, under no circumstances, consider this a review. What I will leave you with though is if I didn't think this was any good, I'd have taken my money and I'd have ran. You wouldn't have seen it on my channel whatsoever, because the trust you put in me. I mean, there's near 12,000 of you regularly watching my videos, which completely blows my mind. I don't deal in, as I said, spurious opinion. I like to deal in facts and figures, but I am somewhat attached to this. I do like it. I've got so much time mentally invested in this bit of kit, and please bear that in mind. The polymer stock itself, that's been one long slog to get it to where it is. For everyone involved, really, to do what has been done with this has never been done before, still hasn't been done before, but I think it's turned out pretty well indeed. And we'll see if we can cover the elephant in the room, shall we? This isn't made in the UK, it's not made in Europe even, it's made out in India. And ultimately, you know what, I'm quite happy with that. I dealt with these boys, especially when it came to the moulding and the bits that I was invested in. I had some quite unique engineering hurdles to overcome. They got their heads together and they sorted them, no problem whatsoever. These guys, this is not some backstreet garage out there. The guys at Precihole, they are proper engineering nerds, like I am, like the guys at Airarms are proper nerdy Indian engineer fellas, and they've got some serious engineering capabilities out there. So I'm not worried about that. But remember, I am biased. Is that right? We're all on the same page? Can we get it back to the shed now and take it apart? As you can see, I've just got some footage from a couple of months ago. This came out of the box as a standard length Vanguard, so it had a 50cm barrel, it had a 350cc aluminium bottle on it. So the bottles are aluminium. A lot of people seem to think they're steel. I don't think we've had a steel bottle on the market since the last of the Super 10s, BSAs, back in the early 2000s. But anyway, it is a 350cc bottle. I probably ought to say at this point that my opinions are my own. They're probably, and almost certainly, they're usually not shared by any of the people that I work with. I have some pretty strong opinions, but this has turned out pretty cool. It was a good excuse to do something completely out of the ordinary. So, as you're most likely aware, this was the predecessor, if you like, to the X series. This was made by CZ in the Czech Republic. They built them for the best part of 20 years, and then they announced, 2017, something like that? The dates are all a bit hazy. It's quite a long time ago that they were discontinuing this any case. So at that point, that's when Airarms got in contact with me and said, we've got a plan. And I was okay, right, tell me what you want to do. They gave me quite a few engineering challenges to overcome. They wanted a rifle that could take a bottle or a cylinder. They wanted something that, in my mind, it was always going to be sort of a replacement for the MPR, something that you could use on the farm all week if you were pest controlling, and then you could go and compete with it on the weekends. It had to be a true all-rounder, with a bottle or a cylinder, various different barrel options. But then they said we might well want to do a polymer stock option. Had to be ambidextrous, which in itself brings in quite a lot of challenges. Ambidextrous stock, so that can be shot either left or right-handed. There's a few compromises that have to be made in an ambidextrous stock, so there was a few challenges there. The polymer itself always brings in a few challenges. It turns out that actually it's quite a fascinating material to work with. Now, I make stuff out of wood. That's my living. I work with wood. I have a good feel for wood. I have an eye for detail working with wood, and I understand how to manipulate the wood and the stock so it will fit you very, very well. But to use this as a material, the biggest challenge with this actually
was how to get it to handle nicely. The majority of sort of polymer stocks, they're quite hollow, great for reducing weight down to a bare minimum, but that does often mean that they tend to become very front heavy. You've typically got sort of hollow rear end sections. Often they feel a bit flimsy, tend to be a little bit unbalanced. So that was something that I really had to work on. And the end result with this is it's really quite fascinating. We're going to take this stock apart later on, but the way this handles, it really is quite fast handling. Moving quite fast. I've got, oh no, way out, I've got one shot left. And it's quite unlike anything in the air rifle world. It's worked out really quite well. I think given that this is a 700 quid rifle, the way this fits, the way it feels, the handling of this, you're not going to find a lot of the stuff that's in this unless you start looking to the aftermarket world, the stuff that I do every day. It's certainly accurate enough. In fact, it's quite embarrassing because I'll put some cards up in a minute. First time on the range, I put the little Vector veyron on it that I'm using now, shot a couple of my nsra cards just after I finished my bench rest league. I went and chucked a couple of cards down. Now, I shot it completely nsra style, and I'd shot around the outside of the card to start with, some groups on the outside corners just to let the pellets settle in. And with the JSB shorts and the Air Arms Fields, the Die 7s that we use on the channel a lot, I pretty much matched my season average on the nsra cards. And that was the first time out. To start with, I was making small cheek adjustments and butt piece adjustments and things like that, and went and shot a couple of decent cards, which was quite surprising. I hadn't spent any real time with a factory model. Now, over the years, I have played with a number of the sort of pre-production ones and things like that, so I had a reasonable idea of what to expect, but it was the first time actually shooting the stock that I'd built a few years before that and seeing it in the polymer. It's all been quite an overwhelming experience because I did a lot of this work a good few years ago. Then it sort of went a little bit quiet. Things was happening in the background that I have no real interest in. I didn't get involved in. I've got my own business to run, my own stuff to do. And then the beginning of this year, get a phone call, can you come down to factory? Can you come and have a look at these bits and pieces before we start signing some of this stuff off for the final bits and bobs? And it's, yeah, like I say, I'm completely in awe of this at the moment. The way that it's turned out compared to how I saw this at the beginning. Like I say, I made all of the prototypes originally in wood, which the more time I spent working with the polymer stocks, and there's a couple of things that I really will never forget from this project. Once I started doing some of the development work for the polymer, just to see how feasible it is, see how strong it is and things like that, I collected up a load of existing polymer stocks and I chopped them all up. I ran them through the bandsaw, looked at how they were moulded and things like that, and myself and the team at Air Arms, we'd built up a good plan of what we wanted, and this was before anything to do with the guys in India. We had a very good idea of how we needed this to go together, what we were trying to accomplish and how to go about it with the moulding. But we needed specialist help. A number of firms, moulding firms, very good moulding firms in fact, were sort of spoken to, but we needed someone who understood rifle stock specifically so that we could manipulate the thickness of the walls and things like that just to get the mass of the stock and everything else, because of course you've got quite a chunky action here. It's a lot bigger than all of the other stuff like the x200, and getting the weight where you wanted it to make it light and fast handling, that was very challenging. And the guys in India actually, they got their heads together and they really, for what I was able to give them and what they've managed to turn out, and they basically managed to match all of my prototypes I made were within a couple of grams of the balance point, the weight in the rear end to make it nice and light, make it fast handling. They really have done a fantastic job of that, and that comes from because of their experience in doing their own in-house rifle stocks. Precihole generally make entry-level rifles because they can sell tons of those to their domestic market, but that's not to say that they don't have the ability to manufacture high-end equipment. Do they have the pedigree? Probably not at the moment. Could they make something to match our high-end European rifles? Absolutely they could do. Would they better sell them in India? Maybe not, probably not. Almost certainly not, in fact, because of course you can import stuff. There's weird tax rules as well in India as well. They can import sporting goods and they don't pay sort of as much tax as they would do on domestic products. So it's a very unusual country in that respect. Fascinating, really. But when you've got coming up for 1.5 billion people where shooting is something of a national sport, I mean, if you're in Europe and you tell people that you shoot targets for a hobby, you're looked at like a lunatic in most cases. Whereas in India, it's something of a national sport. I mean, their Olympians are absolutely smashing it of the last few years. The Indians and the Chinese are the two countries to beat. But I suppose statistically, when you've got a population, like say, both of them are virgin and 1.5 billion, I mean, I don't even know what that looks like. That's such a huge amount. I don't think most of us can really fathom what that looks like. But when you've got a population that big, of course, you're going to be able to find more marksmen and women. I mean, particularly their pistol shooting and stuff. You know, the Olympic pistol, 10-meter rifle, absolutely incredible. But the guys at Precihole, they have got some pretty good pedigree in terms of their machining and things like that. They are certainly no backstreet garage. I'll be honest, I was a little concerned when the guys at Airarm said we're thinking about using an Indian firm. Honestly, I didn't sleep that night. I was a little bit concerned, but I have in the meantime since dealt with them, spoke to them, gave them some engineering challenges to figure out, and actually they've just completely blown it out of the water, really. I didn't expect that they would be able to do what they have done. They far exceeded my expectation. A lot of people have said that this is just a rebranded Precihole. It's not. It's nothing like it in the slightest. I've got a couple here, so I can just show you all the blocks. I've got an S200, we've got S4 series. I'll get them. Right, I've got a bit of a zoom out going on here. You're propped up over the top. I wanted to try and reduce parallax error in the picture here, so you can see the X200 block is significant. So this is the S200, the CZ made one. Quite a tiny little block. Originally started off as a pistol by all accounts back in the day. Here is S4, S5 series, so that's the block and breech block trigger unit, so the trigger would be sat down here slightly. This bottom piece here is just the gauge manifold. This here is simply an extension piece so that the gauge sits fairly flush with the underside of the stock. So if you were putting it in a chassis or something like that, you can pop the gauge back up against the block if you wanted to. So it's purely just an extension piece. And here at the bottom here is a Precihole Match Pro rifle. So this is the one I was using last winter, messing around with. You can see that none of the blocks are really even remotely the same. Only really the things that are sort of interchangeable between an X200 and any of the Precihole ones are the barrel breech seals. So even if you look at these trigger blades on here, that clearly was the same. I mean, it's just a trigger blade ultimately. They obviously have this part on the shelf, but even that won't interchange with that because the post differences. This has got a slightly thicker post. That's the same post diameter as all of the other Airarms models. So you could potentially put that onto like an MPR and things like that, possibly HFT 500. I haven't tried, but in fact, that's an HFT 500. No, that's XTI trigger ball. So that's on a Rowan post. It's just cobbled together from bits and pieces. But in any case, even the two of those, they're not interchangeable. And I kind of feel that that's a little bit of a shame. On my PX100, that's also got a very similar cocking handle arrangement. So I've got a side lever one of these as well, which you've probably seen in some of the previous videos. Well, the little biathlon handle on that looks very, very similar. These are aluminium, anodised. On the Precihole one, they're engineering plastic, so they look quite similar, but there's basically really no interchangeable parts between them. Now, I guess that was in an attempt to differentiate between the two, but I do think it's probably a bit of a shame because some of these barrels in the match rifles, it would have been brilliant to be able to sort of chop and change and have some sort of further modularity. Now, there apparently is going to be a variation on bits and pieces available for these down the line. Now, there's three distinct ranges. So we've got the Vanguard, which are basically the sub-12s. It was originally called the Virtue, so that is I've always thought of it as a bell target version, if you like, so that's a diopter equipped version. I've got a picture of one of those. So that was called the Virtue. Whether it's going to stay called the Virtue, I don't know. And then there was the Valour, which is basically the FAC versions, and of course the majority of the parts are then interchangeable. So you can sort of mix and match. If you decide to change disciplines, you can do. Now, this is just the shroud on here. That's just some shrink tube. I haven't had the chance to paint that up. I'm still messing around with the shroud internals. I've already given this a barrel chop. I've actually got a 14mm old EV2 nickel barrel underneath of there. I've done a few sort of little tweaks and bits and pieces to that, but the barrel that's came out of this, that was a 14mm diameter barrel. So again, that won't fit the Precihole models. The 14mm outer diameter barrel that came out of this is very, very similar spec, if you like. Externally, it's got its own custom choke profile, very similar to the Lothar Wolfer barrel fitted to the HFT 500s, the older EV2 barrel that would be in what's underneath there. So it's 14mm diameter. it certainly looks a bit skinnier because now they've upped to the size of the air cylinders. So the older air arms ones are 1.25 inches. They've gone up to 1.5 inches now, of course, to increase the internal volume. But it's just an optical illusion that the barrels then suddenly look skinnier. At 500mm, is it susceptible to any dings and damage? Well, let's be honest, how many HFT 500s do you see with damaged barrels? You don't really. How many old MPRs? The main difference, of course, is there's a slight overhang when you've got a shorter bottle and a longer barrel. I mean, I can't see it being a problem. Let's be honest, them 14mm barrels have been around for donkey's years. The CZ had a 15mm barrel. This is a 15mm barrel. And again, none of these parts are interchangeable between any of this lot. Like I say, breech seals is about the only thing that I can think of. Button gauges are standard button gauges, you know. While it's here, right, so this is the fill probe for the X200. This is a prime example of what happens when you don't compromise to save a few quid. A lot of people looked at it and went, why on earth is that so long? Well, in my world, that's completely normal, right? I'm not going to compromise the underside of a stock, chop out big holes right at the most important part of the stock underneath of here, just to save a couple of quid and not have an extended fill probe. Now, I've been doing that for over a decade, actually, and they mostly started out originally on custom-built BSA R10s that went into laminate stocks. They have a fill probe in a similar position. Now, instead of chopping out all your stock, making it feel horrible in hand, just make the longer probe. It works beautifully, obviously fits up inside the underneath of the action itself, and of course this additional length here is to cater for the depth in the belly of the stock. And this is the whole thing with this. Once the guys in India took hold of this, it was amazing how many more things we were able to build into the spec, because ultimately, I guess, cheaper to manufacture stuff, they were able to put in a lot higher finished spec than we initially anticipated, and even down to the stock itself. I was able to do something really quite cool with this. Something that I wish, I mean, again, I've been doing it for probably over a decade. I'm going to show you the cheek piece on this in a second. Let me move all this around. Right, you're not going to have to humour me here. We're getting a bit nerdy. Initially, we didn't think we were going to do this. There was loads of sort of pre-production versions of it. Now, being ambidextrous, of course, it can be shot left and right-handed. Now, originally it had a sort of a standard rollover cheek piece on it, but I've been doing this for donkey's years on the ACZ chassis and bits and pieces. It's got a wonky looking cheek piece. I'll put a better picture up on there. But you've got two rollovers, slightly different on either side. So on the left hand, well, it makes no difference. The way this is put together, these are the cheek posts. Now, most polymer stocks just have the posts moulded in because it's the cheapest. But we did it this way around. We've got a top plate on here, almost identical to what I use in all of my custom builds. Now, for the lot of you that are really into your target shooting and things, there's going to be some cheek offset kits, so you can actually adjust the lateral adjustment of the cheek piece. Now, they're going to be very similar to the stuff that goes into all my custom builds. Of course, it costs more money to put an additional plate in. There's more parts involved. There's quite a lot of additional work that goes into it. But at the moment, as you're looking at it at the minute, on the left-hand side, we've got a much more aggressive cheek rollover. So that's more akin to what you'll find on the match rifles, on the XTI, for instance. So this gives a super consistent cheek weld, cheekbone on top of it. Now, depending on where you've come from in the sport, if you're a target shooter, you're going to want to use that almost certainly. However, if you're a bit newer to the sport, you may find that this is a little bit uncomfortable, and especially if you're shooting with digital scopes. Now, I do want to quickly give this a shout out. This is the old One Leaf MT1000. I've been using this now for about 6 months. Absolutely mental bit of kit. That's completely changed my outlook on the pest control side of stuff. But when you're using digital scopes, for instance, because you don't get parallax error in the same way that you would do with a traditional eye relief scope, you can get away with a much more comfortable, gentle rollover. So this side is much more like everyone's favourite old MPR stock. If you're sat shooting rats, for instance, for a few hours on a cold evening, you're probably not going to want the more aggressive cheek piece digging in your face. Perfect for your target shooting. Maybe if you're HFT and you might only take one shot every 3 to 5 minutes, but if you're sat peering through the scope, you can simply spin that around. You don't have to take the cheek post off. You can just take it out and flip it around, whether you're left or right-handed, to suit obviously what side of your face you're on, the side of the stock. But gentle rollover, like I say, is primarily designed for short eye relief scopes, like the connector type scopes, digital scopes, and then on this side here we've got a much more aggressive rollover to suit sort of more target disciplines where absolutely consistent cheek weld and sight line is super important. And able to do that, again, nice and rigid, all bolts on and off. For those of you that maybe want to do your own sort of custom cheek pieces, maybe you're an FT shooter and want a scalloped cheek, it all comes apart, so you don't have to then mess about trying to get posts in. It's all built modularity into it so that it all can be customized. You can configure it how you wanted it. So yeah, really happy with how that's turned out. there's always a seam on these moulded stocks. The seams on here, they're put specifically in places so that you can't really feel them in use. They're not going to be offensive. Really quite rigid, this stuff. It's got a little bit of give to it. It's quite a strange material because once you've been holding it for a little while, it sort of warms up. It's not a cold, nasty plastic. It's actually really quite solid. I mean, if you give that a smack, it's going to hurt your hand. This material is surprisingly robust. I'll get to the front end in a moment. Fairly standard back end to it. We've got length of pull adjustment, so you can adjust the back end here. Got height adjustment on the butt pad. Now, this was funny, right? This butt pad is not an off-the-shelf part. None of this is off-the-shelf parts. I, at the very beginning, said I need a deep concave butt pad on there, and it's got to be super squodgy, right? Now, not to really deal with any recoil. There is no recoil as such in air rifles, is there? However, I always tend to shoot in as lighter clothing as I can get away with, and I absolutely detest the hard rubber butt pads. And the amount of these at the prototyping stage, they turn up too hard. The guys at the factory are like, yeah, Tom's not going to like that. We've got a beautifully squodgy little rubber butt pad on here now, so of course it's all adjustable. I'm actually looking to use some of these going forward with some custom backing plates because that is so nice in the shoulder. If you're shooting in a light t-shirt or something like that, especially through the summer, you can just pull it tightly into the shoulder and it's beautifully compliant. It just grips on your clothing absolutely beautifully. And again, this is all of the little things like that. You don't expect it on a rifle that's 700 quid. The amount of stuff that the guys in India were able to do whilst keeping the price sensible was really quite surprising. Now again, the actual length of pull posts is the same part in there. Now all of the hardware is built into the rear. There's actually a cartridge in here that holds the clamps and everything else. This framework that's inside that you can't currently see, they were even able to manipulate the size and the mass of the material in there. They used that to counterbalance the stock to get it to handle exactly how I wanted it to. So this thing does handle lightning fast. It handles like a proper custom built bit of kit, but pared back enough that 95% of you are going to be able to pick this up and go and use it without thinking about it. Right, hang on, let's go back a little bit. I didn't really want to do a polymer stock to start with. I work in wood, I've said it so many times. But once I realised what could be done with this, I was up in the early hours, I woke up thinking about this damn thing. When you've got something that's as rigid as this, you don't have to play by the same rules that you would build a stock out of wood. And because it's ambidextrous, the biggest compromise of any ambidextrous stock is that to keep the strength for the wood, you end up pushing off of the centre line of the rifle. And ideally, a true-handed stock, you're very well centred behind it. Now this, if this was made out of wood, in fact I did make some prototypes, I did all the prototyping in wood, but had this stock been made like this in wood, first time you drop it, it would snap. But because of the sheer strength of this stuff, I mean, the dimensional stability of this is fascinating. It really is quite inert. It's practically waterproof. I mean, certainly weatherproof, but really, really quite strong material. And because of that, I've been able to sort of reduce the whole width of the back end through here, put a big cutout in it. Now, although that looks a little bit S200 like, I wanted to give a little bit of a nod to the S200 and the older MPR stocks, but the main reason for that is if you look how thin it is here, it pulls you way closer to the centre line than you would typically find on anything else ambidextrous. It handles considerably more like a dedicated handed stock. So yeah, it worked out really well. Just the sheer strength of this, fascinating material to work with. In fact, I'd like to do more with this going forward. You've obviously got a slight seam down it, nothing too offensive really in there. The inlet on here is really well done as well, so the action only has a single fixing bolt underneath. It sits in there beautifully rigid. Now there's a little bit of give in this stock. It's not a brittle feeling plastic. It's certainly got that decent robust feel to it. It's not like anything that you'll have seen in the air rifle world before. Long rail right from the fore end right back to the gauge there makes it just a bit more user friendly. Now with bottle stocks specifically, they tend to be a bit stubby. If your bottle's in here, they tend to be a bit cut off short, and then you're left with a problem because most of us are going to be holding it further up the front or want to put a bipod on or sling and things like that. So it took a bit of jiggling about to get it how I wanted it, but I was able to manipulate the rear end depth to suit the slightly deeper fore end here, because of course you can't just make the fore end deep without adjusting the rear end depth, because then they start to handle badly, don't balance nice, and you're just all out sort of kilter really. It has to be right. Extending this full length underneath here, we can sling a bipod right up the front underneath of that, And we've got this cool little trim piece here, which is basically like a trim reducer to reduce that down from the diameter of the bottle down to a cylinder. This also means, let me get it apart and I'll show you. This is where your bottle would be sitting. It'll have little bolts through, so the actual rail itself is bolted. It's got a captive nut where they're loose, but you can see there's little hex insert holes there. So the rail is actually bolted straight onto this. Now, you can see here that the fore end is very, very refined. This material is super, super strong and rigid. So actually that's the main structure of the fore end of the stock. Now, you simply cannot make it that refined in wood whatsoever. You end up having to have quite a deep gutty stock on it, which again is going to make it handle quite poorly. So this is again one of the advantages to the polymer material. But then this piece, now we all threw a lot of ideas around for a long time. Now I can't take credit for all of this. I did the basic bits, the easy bits. I had to then pass off stuff like this to the professionals, you know, the guys that can do it in the CAD work and things like that, and they've done a frankly brilliant job. This is basically just a trim reducing piece, so it takes the diameter down, but it also then gives you the lines of a more traditional sporting stock. It sort of all locks in, bolts back under from underneath. But doing it this way around, of course, we've now got longer fore end, loads more rigidity in the fore end of the stock itself. But with this type of design, if you wanted to put in like a paintball type reg between the block and your bottle, and obviously sit your bottle forward, there was talk some time ago about putting this file out there so that you can then sort your own versions. If you wanted to put an extended regulator in there or anything like that, you could then print off or whatever the cording piece to trim fill, so it always looked nice. It was a really cool way of actually then sort of working around some compromises. Makes it nice and clean. This isn't really a structural part. The whole fore end, as I've said, is the built-in structure down here, but this is just to make it much more clean aligned, get a nice grip around the whole underside of the stock if you're shooting with a glove on as well. So quite a lot that went into this, really. It looks like quite a simple thing. The black plastic doesn't really do much for the overall look. When you design a stock in polymer, you really have just got the overall silhouette, the outside lines of it to sort of set the theme for the rifle itself. And yeah, so we've got sort of a bit of a nod to the 200, a bit of a nod to the MPR, but then all of the geometry is laid out as an absolute modern, fast handling target rifle. Back end here, I mean, this now is bench rest compliant as well. Stepped down the bottom here. Bearing in mind, I've done this years ago, so there's a lot of stocks that have got this swoop underneath of this. The original ones of these were done in 2018 with this sort of swoop. Although this is not a bench rest gun, it's now bench rest compliant. It will sit in a World's Rules rear bag if you wanted to. I mean, I wouldn't use it as a bench rest gun. It's a sporting rifle ultimately, but the shape of this now is bench rest compliant as well. It shoots beautifully off the back of your hand if you want to shoot nsra cards. Again, if you're shooting long range off a bipod and you want to get your hand under the back, you've got a beautiful little stepped piece here. Works really well and allowed me to manipulate the drop on the rear end, so it was super comfortable. Shoots great prone off the deck as well, so HFT prone, there's a lot of drop on the rear of this. Proper all-rounder. This little step here, they didn't put one in, but if you want to put a sling stud in, that's where it was designed to go. So there's nothing worse than having a sling down here and you're trying to shoot prone and your sling's all bunched up underneath the back end of your rifle. If you want to put a sling stud in, have a little look. I haven't tried, I haven't actually looked with the intention of doing it on this one, but if you're going to put a sling stud in, that's where to put it, so that your sling will be bunched up under here, not the important part, the butt end, if it's on the deck. Clever, eh? Got sort of a Euro stippling on here. Now this is fascinating because I'm not sure how they did this, how they got that texture in there, but it's beautiful. Having seen this, I'd like to have probably extended the actual panels, make them slightly larger on there, but it feels really nice. It's grippy in hand, cold damp hands are not a problem. I've actually been out of it the last couple of weeks and it's been cold, it's been damp, it's been wet with the old night vision on there. It's been working really, really well. I've been flat packing a lot of rats. We need to talk about the field pressure actually. This is unregulated ones. This is not an R model. It came with a 50cm barrel, so it's the standard length version. All of the x200s so far have 160 bar field pressure, so that's the same for the 6 foot-pound ones when they're out. The FAC ones will have a slightly higher field pressure, but if it doesn't say anywhere else, it should say in your paperwork in the box. There should be a big print thing. The maximum field pressure is 160 bar. Now, it's a bit of an unusual choice nowadays with the higher field pressures. However, with a 350cc bottle up the front there, you're going to have a dive bottle or a compressor to fill that up. if you're going up to sort of 200 plus bar. 160 bar is basically about the maximum that you're going to be able to pump that up to without having a small heart attack doing it. The reality is, especially in the sub 12 and the 6 foot-pound models, you don't necessarily need much more field pressure than that to actually get the power that you need. With the 350cc bottle, they give, or they quote 120 shots. In fact, this one does just marginally more than that. Definitely better from 150 down to about 95 bar. The first few shots after a fill, if you were pest control, then you could just fill it straight to 160 and get out. But if you were competing and you want the tightest spread, I mean, over the whole sort of fill, I did 100 shots over the chrono, and we got something like 12 feet per second spread over the best 75 shots, which is pretty ridiculous considering that this is not regulated, as in it has its own regulated valve system. There's almost certainly room. I mean, I didn't get really involved in the actions. It's a bit outside of my normal scope of work. Yes, I can build barrels and bits and bobs, but I think we've got some potential to increase shot counts down the line. Certainly, once I put them pictures up on my Facebook page a couple of weeks ago, the ones when I showed you all the actions, I put them pictures on my Facebook page. It was quite funny because my phone went mad that night. A load of guys in the aftermarket world, a lot of my mates all of a sudden went, oh, I'm putting an order in for one of those. So at the moment, I'm absolutely certain that there's a load of aftermarket guys that are looking at making bits and pieces from tunes and things like that. So it's got a nice trigger in it as well, 2-stage trigger, nothing too fancy in there. The target brake weight on that was 180 to 200 grams. So some firms will try and tell you that a 200 gram trigger is a match trigger. It's not. It's a sporting trigger. It's a nice, safe trigger to use, especially if you're out in the cold and the damp and things like that. Almost certainly there's going to be down the line an ability to reduce the trigger brake weight on there, but 200 grams, it's a nice safe place to be at. It's not really going to cost you any points. Remember, it's not an outright bench rest gun. Matthew did really well with it on his bench rest rig. It's definitely got the bones. They're very accurate. Are they all going to be accurate? Of course not. I'm a realist, right? I work on so much stuff, and if you make any number of mechanical things, there's always going to be some that are, let's be honest, Friday afternoon jobs, right? It happens. That's what your warranty's for. Chuck it back at them, get them to sort it out. But there is a really important thing, and it's probably going to be an ongoing thing because these are manufactured in India. The humidity is ridiculous out there at certain times. The barrel, or all of the barrels, are going to have a rust inhibitor in them. So whether it mentions it in the instructions or not, take it from me that you are going to need to clean your barrel really quite well when you first get it. You're going to want a pull through kit. Now, of course, this has a breech seal in the back of the barrel, so you're going to have to be very careful that you don't pull your breech seal out, but you're going to need to give it a really good clean before you start using it. This is going to stay carbined. This is how I always imagined this rifle. Nice short cylinder. This is a hot swappable cylinder as well. So why should hot swappable cylinders be confined to match rifles? Well, this is a valved cylinder, so the same as what you'll find on a lot of 10 metre and Olympic type match rifles. Can be filled directly on the gun, or you can remove it and you can fill it. Now, if we're talking about carbines for a minute, the only real downside to carbine rifles is their air efficiency. So of course, a shorter barrel just consumes a little bit more air for the same power or whatever you're chasing. The biggest downside to sort of small cylinders and things is topping them up in the winter, because it all warms up, takes a little while to then reacclimatise again, and it can throw the rifles off for a little while. When you've got a swappable cylinder, like say this is a valved cylinder, you can have a spare one in the car. So if you've had one of them mad sessions where you've shot way more than you thought you would, if you've got another one that's already acclimatised to the outside conditions, you can literally have a cup of tea, get all your stuff collected up, pop a new cylinder on, and you can go back out again, so you haven't got to then mess around. I personally much prefer the cleaner lines of a cylinder. Also, for the HFT lot, having a rounded bottle up the front here makes it a little bit unstable if you're resting against a peg. When you've got the stock with the little infill piece in there, you've got a much flatter side. It's a lot more stable shooting a cylinder rifle off of a peg. FT in it, doesn't really matter. You're shooting off your knee. If you're pest controlling and you want a large shot count and you're shooting off of a tripod, go for the bottle. But the cool thing with this is you can chop and change all the bits that you like. If you wanted to build a bottled 300 shot 6 foot-pound one with diopters, yeah, that is right. You could do. I'm not sure why you would, but you could, because all of the bits are then interchangeable. And down the line, there's going to be some pretty interesting new parts for this. So, yeah, I'd really like to just say thank you to Claire and the team at Air Arms. They gave me the opportunity to, well, go a bit mad. I can't take all of the glory for this. People that are far more intelligent than I am got in and did the really important bits of all the CAD work and all the fine detaily bits. But giving me the opportunity to do something completely different, to push myself, it's been a whale of a time doing it. I mean, it's been a process for sure. I was not sure that this thing would ever turn up at some points. it certainly tested me. I think it tested the factory. The guys in India were tested, but it's turned out pretty damn cool. I'm really happy with this. So thanks, Claire, for the opportunity to do it. I mean, ultimately, she must be happy because she's invited me back for some further stuff. So there's more projects happening at the moment, but we'll talk about them in another video, shall we? I'll see you in the next one, guys. I've probably forgotten tons of stuff, but it's not a review, remember? I'll see you in the next one.